Hey guys, Eric here, and I want to do a brief video talking about my thoughts on the current state of the content that we cover, like the fandom pipeline into social and political activism, and what I see happening in the future. Because I think there are some pretty exciting things that could be happening in terms of like seeing the algorithm break down a little bit. And so, what I'm going to do is we're going to take a look at 5 channels. And I'm going to show you guys how fractured the community is now in terms of messaging, which I think is really, really important. Because one of the ways that that this movement was able to do as much as they did leading up into the past election is with like sort of a very cohesive, well-aligned message and activism that they had, where they were all sort of on the same page. And now it feels like everybody is sort of scrambling, and a lot of that has to do with once you've defeated the dragon, what's next for all of these adventurers? And so they don't really know where to go here. So I want to talk about that a little bit. But before we get into that, if you go on to enjoy this video, please consider subscribing to the channel, leave a comment, and leave a like if you enjoy it. All right, so I want to say first of all that anyone who did not see this whole connection to social and political activism from these fandom channels. We've been talking about it for quite a while. I don't make a lot of videos about it specifically, but on the podcast we've talked about it. It's very obvious that most of these channels, like if you look at Geeks and Gamers, very clearly Jeremy and even Ryan Cannell have a lot of political activism going on within their community. So not super surprised about them. But a lot of the other channels, and one in particular we're going to talk about at the end of this video, seeing how quickly they've shifted into full-on politics is quite interesting. But there's been no mystery for that in terms of like what these channels were all about. They were always political. They were always social. They used the fandom communities to sort of gather the troops, you should say, or gather support so they could enact this activism that they have. And they want to deny that because they want to act as if activism is bad, because they always paint liberals and leftists as activists, but they're also activists. Don't listen to them when they tell you otherwise. All right, so we have 2 groups of people that watch this content. We have the true blue guys who know exactly what this content is. They know what the movement is. They understand the stakes. They don't like diversity. They don't like, seeing people who are gay, trans people of color, women and stuff like that in positions of power in movies, TV shows, video games, things like that. They understand that. So they are going to just jump on board and start paddling along with everybody else because they understand it. They get it. Those are the people that are the most dangerous in terms of like what they're looking for long term, because they already had a preconceived idea of what they were looking for when they sought out this content. And this just echoes their bias. It puts them in a place where they can just continuously like stew in all this hatred and outrage. And so those guys are probably the most dangerous. But then I think the larger group is the group that jumped in because they just love these things. They love movies, they love video games, they love TV shows. They found these channels, they found a community, and then they were slowly radicalized over a few years to get to where we are now. So we have a bunch of radicalized people, political people, who I truly believe, like, ask yourself this. If you're somebody that watches these channels, did you guys ever think about politics every day, all day long? And you might say, do I do that now? And the answer to that is yes, you do. Because everything they talk about in terms of DEI and Hollywood and all these things, it is all political or socially political. And they've done this over time by sort of I guess grooming is probably the best. Indoctrinating is a good word there. Like indoctrinating you and easing you into it to the point where now it is a part of your everyday life and you don't even realize it is. And I'm telling you, if you're looking at this video now, you're tuning into this video and you hear me say this, realize that you can break away from that. It's going to take some self-awareness to do it, but you can break away from that, because I believe that's the largest group is radicalized or semi-radicalized fans of movies, TV shows, video games, all of these things. All right, so the good news is for anybody out there who is tired of this content, it looks to me like we're seeing some changes in the way YouTube's algorithm is working and how it's going to affect these channels long term. So right now we're looking at side scrollers, right? Side scrollers, I've talked about them a few times here and whatnot, but it seems to me like they are sort of looking around trying to figure out what the landscape is. If you look at some of the videos they're making now, it's not quite as cohesive as it used to be. They're certainly getting a few big hits on videos here and there, but it looks to me like they're just trying a little bit of everything. They're going with more simple thumbnails. They're going with a standardized thumbnail. They're trying like the old school, black text on one side thumbnail or whatever, black and white text with some red. It looks like they're trying a little bit of everything. with, you know, shots of Craig in the thumbnails here and there. They're trying a little bit of everything, but it doesn't look like they're very cohesive in terms of what their actual narrative is. Because the truth is, for a while, they kind of had that whole Games Award, the Real Gamers Award and whatnot. That controversy came around, and now it seems like they're sort of just kind of hitting all of the fences. So they're not doing quite as much in terms of like hitting those social beats as some of the other channels. Let's take a look at the Geeks and Gamers channel over here now. So if you look at Geeks and Gamers, it is business as usual for these guys. They're still doing sort of the same thing, which is making a lot of politically charged and socially charged content that ties into the fandoms. This is what got them to where they are. They've gotten really good at it. Like, if you look at like the channels that I think have done a really good job of making this all sort of work together, I would say Geeks and Gamers, Critical Drinker, Nerdrotic, those channels, they've done a really good job of hiding what their actual narrative is and with the fandom, which with Geeks and Gamers, I'm not really sure why they're still doing this, because it's pretty clear to me that Jeremy is all in on politics. So I feel like it's a little weird that he hasn't gone heavier into the politics, even on Geeks and Gamers, because I feel like he's made it very obvious where he stands. And these videos he's doing, I mean, the views aren't bad. Obviously, you got a 200K view here on Rachel Zegler. The views aren't bad, but I feel like he could probably get some bigger views on some of the content over here if he were just to go heavier into politics. But I don't know if that's going to happen. Let's take a look over here at Nerdrotic. So Nerdrotic is one of the few people that is still business as usual. We're not seeing a lot of changes to Nerdrotic's content, and Nerdrotic doesn't have to change. Nerdrotic is one of those channels where, I've said this before, if we're talking about the bubble bursting and a lot of these channels sort of fizzling out, it's going to take a lot longer for that to happen to Nerdrotic, and I don't even know if it would ever 100% happen to this channel. At least it would take a long time for Nerdrotic to get out of the algorithm and YouTube not promote his content, or massive changes to YouTube's terms of service that target specifically his channel, and I don't see that happening either. But yeah, we're seeing same business as usual. Not a lot of change in Nerdrotic's channel in terms of their content that's being made, Gary's content. Let's take a look at another channel here. This is Endymion. It's another channel that I've talked about once in a while. More of the gaming section of the anti-woke, anti-DEI stuff. It looks like he's kind of stuck on like one or two things here. Assassin's Creed at the moment. Still talking about Dragon Age. I'm not sure why anybody cares about that, to be honest. At this point, when something doesn't work out or it isn't successful, I don't really see why you would continuously go after it, but it seems like they're into it or whatever. Seems like here now he's realizing that, you know, they need to talk more broadly, because we're in a spot where they kind of got everything they asked for, right? They've got the politics aligned with them, some of the social views sort of aligned with them, so they got everything they wanted on paper. So it's hard to play the victim narrative when you got everything you asked for. And I made a video talking about where I see that the changes to that happening down the road, and I still feel like that video still stands up. I made it like a week ago. You can check that out. But I feel like they have to get more broad. It has to be broader statements now at this point, because individual projects with no DEIs, you know, initiatives happening, no wokeness and things or whatever, it's going to be harder for them to pick and choose like things to complain about. We're seeing it now with the whole Kingdom Come situation, where they're trying to make that something into something it's not. We're seeing that from the neo-Christian side, which more on that in a moment. I think that's the bigger story to talk about. We're going to keep an eye on that, but let's take a look at one last channel. And this is one where I've seen the content change drastically, and pretty much just right in line with what I see a lot of these channels having to do in the future. That's Yellow Flash 2. So Yellow Flash 2 here, Yellow Flash, is just literally a Trump channel now. It's just a Trump channel. He's turned into the Trump news network, pretty much. You see how much Trump stuff he's doing. And this is probably the biggest shift here in content. If we're talking about the channels that we keep an eye on, I think Yellow Flash is one of the biggest shifts in content, because we're seeing, like, for every one fandom video, we're seeing either a Trump fandom blend or just Trump stuff, like liberal tiers, this and that stuff. And you're looking here, like, all right, so we're talking about like fandom stuff. We got 56,000 view video here with Fantastic Four. And then if you look, let's look at one of his Trump videos here. Look, 167,000 views on that one. 123,000 views on this one with Captain America. So it looks like he's getting, from what I'm seeing here, like right here, 878,000 views on this one right? So it's very clear to me that he understands that he's just going to dive into this Trump stuff. It's got a higher chance of making money for him. And so he's just going to dive headfirst into the Trump stuff. So as you can see, we looked at 5 channels that sort of were heavily invested into the anti-woke, anti-DEI culture shift before the election. And all of them are sort of doing different types of content. But you'll notice the only 2 that are sort of still locked into their own spaces is Geeks and Gamers and Nerdrotic. They're kind of staying the course. But the other channels we looked like Endymion, Side Scrollers, and Yellow Flash, it's like they had to shift completely because that the runoff from that pipeline in the algorithm is starting to narrow a little bit. It's not as wide as it used to be. And so they're having to get creative with ways to make money. And this fracturing, I think, is ultimately really good because it means that that movement is now sort of diluting a bit, and we're seeing smaller subgroups pop out. And so there's less mobilization, which I think is very important if we're trying to get away from this outrage content and move beyond this. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the neo-Christian, Goonergate, Melonie Mac stuff, JDA, Razor Fist, all of these guys, and how that's affecting this. So that's still sort of a story that is evolving, and we're not sure where it's going to end up, but I've covered it a little bit here on my channel. I think it's quite interesting that these guys did not know or didn't have any idea that they had a bunch of neo-Christian activists looking for purity in their group, taking away freedoms and rights based on religion. I don't think either they did know it and they just thought that these guys were good for their movement, or they were just completely blinded because they all hated the same thing. And so they just didn't pay attention to each other's, what everybody else was doing. I think that's going to cause major damage to this movement. And I don't know if either side sees that yet. So I think we have people like Melonie Mac who doesn't care if all of it breaks down because she's just kind of focused on the bubble of her community. But people like Geeks and Gamers, Nerdrotic, Critical Drinker, they don't need that stuff in their group. They stand to have the biggest impact from like a shift in views going from like freedom, sexy women, boobs, tits, violence to like this neo-Christian movement where it's like censorship of all of that stuff. No overt sexual stuff, no relationship stuff, maybe even like I would not be surprised if they start to call stuff like violent stuff bad if they get to that point. I wouldn't be surprised based on the traction that's happening right now. And like I've said before, I'm typically right about this stuff. So I'm pretty sure we're going to see some sort of push against violence at a certain point from that neo-Christian group. But anyway, I see that doing a lot more damage to this community than anything diluting the algorithm, is that infighting that's going to happen. And I think some of these guys know it, but I think the ones on the other side, like your Melonie Macs, your JDAs, people like that, they don't care if the infighting affects the greater movement because they are just in it for views and money. Not that these guys aren't, but they don't have an idea of like the bigger picture. I know people like JDA talks about the fact that he thinks there is a bigger picture. I don't truly think that for him there is. I think it really is just about making money, and anything he gets as a byproduct of that is fine with him. So that's where we are right now. I think things, if you're looking for a meltdown sort of, or a crash out from some of the people in this outrage section, you won't have to wait much longer, because I believe we're getting very close to that space where the meltdowns and the outrage stuff, it isn't going to be as mobilized and aligned as it was before. So that's really good. But we'll have to keep an eye on this space. I will update this video as time goes on over the next 2 years, as we move through the political climate before we get to the midterms, to see where these channels are, because I really do believe that we're going to see those shifts happen by the end of 2025, moving into 2026, to where these guys are. And definitely over the summer, we're going to see some changes, depending on some of the policy changes that happen while Trump is president. Anyway, let me know what you think about this. Leave a comment down below. Give me a thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel if you're new. And I'll catch everyone later. Take care.